And welcome back to the Addictions Podcast. This is your host, Paul Kelly. I am particularly excited about this episode because I have the esteemed, honorable EMDR specialist, my dad, Terry Kelly. How are you?
Good, good. Glad to be here.
Excellent. I do have to apologize because when I first started this podcast, I'd sent my dad some like pictures or video or whatever of the podcast that was coming up. Came down to visit Jess and I, and was like, "Oh, do you want to see the podcast studio or whatever?" And he's like, "Sure, yeah, absolutely." And his first response was, "Hmm, okay, it's not quite what I thought it was, you know." So a little bit of Wizard of Oz behind the curtain.
Yeah,
It is a simple, very humble setup that we have here. So, but yeah, now we're doing it. I talked you into it, so I appreciate you doing
yeah,
this.
you're very welcome.
So
Can I preface this
absolutely.
discussion with something I want to share about this guy?
Oh,
It's a common phrase within the AA groups,
hmm.
um, but I am the proud father of an alcoholic.
Thank you,
You are
thank you.
welcome.
Yeah. It's a funny phrase to say, but it means a lot because I think being an alcoholic or having addiction in some capacity is looked at a variety of different ways. And we've talked about this before, where the goal of this podcast, hopefully, is that it's not that I want more alcoholics to be out there. I want there to be more people that recognize that alcohol or drugs or whatever does play a role in their life, and in more cases than not, it's a negative role, or it is a net zero benefit, right? And so, if we can, open the door of communication for that, whether it's through counseling like what you do, whether it's through an actual like program like I go through with AA. Alcoholism looks very, very different. I've shared this before that my bottom was a highly functioning bottom, right? So I wasn't homeless, I didn't lose my job, those kinds of things. And I think that, myself included, when I think about like, oh, this person is an alcoholic, very often I'm thinking of like the worst case scenario.
Yeah,
Um, and so I'm proud to be in this program and proud to be working through it, and I appreciate your support. So
yeah, you
thank you.
got it.
Love you.
Yeah, love you too.
So let's make this about you.
All right.
So, um, growing up in Fairbanks, for those people that don't know, Fairbanks, Alaska is, and I got, for those that can see, this is my map of Alaska. I'm holding my hand up like if you were to make a finger gun and flip it upside down, that is the map of Alaska. I feel like there's, only the elite states get to be able to do this with their hand. And in the middle of the state, there's a small town called Fairbanks. How'd you wind up in Fairbanks?
Well, my father, your grandfather, had come up in 1948 um, to work up here. He had a brother up here. The two of them eventually built a service station together, and that's what brought him north. I was a little bit delayed in that mom was very pregnant at that time. Dad came up in January. I was born in March. We got on the boat um, for Seward. Um, it took a full week. I don't remember any of this, obviously, but I've
The rumor,
the rumor has
yeah.
it, yeah. Um, got on the train in the old train station. It's still in Seward there, and then spent probably it had to have been 15 hours or more, just going further and further into the middle of Alaska. Fairbanks is considered the harshest weather uh, location in the United States. Uh,
I believe it. I can only
yeah,
imagine what Grammy
yeah,
and the your older brothers and sister must have been thinking as they're cruising through Anchorage, and then it just goes into absolutely nothing for another like 9 hours.
yeah,
Um, that's got to be that. that memory, if they were old enough to remember that, has got to be
Yeah.
cool for them. I'm sure it was really scary for your mom.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it would have been. Um, and so anyway, that's how we got here.
So you're one of you've got several siblings. How many siblings?
A total of 7 children, so I've got 6 siblings.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And I one of my fondest memories is Christmas. So I tell people that we have, you know, I've got over 30 first cousins, which is at least true, at least
Yeah, it's
somewhat true. Yeah, I feel
yeah.
like everybody has a million kids. And you know, going over to Uncle Michael and Auntie Sherry's place, and everybody being there, and just there's so many kids and so many little zones within their house of celebrating, and as I got older, I moved from like the TV room to then like the living room, and then from the living room to the kitchen, because that's where all the like high school and then
Yeah.
you know college, and then once you're able to drink, then it's like out on the deck and everyone's like hanging out and having a good time. That's I don't know. I think about that a lot, and that was such a cool opportunity because I don't know that that happens so often, especially with big families. You know, having everybody be in Fairbanks. So you mentioned that your dad had a service station. Did you ever work there?
Oh, yeah, yeah, as a kid, each of us, the boys anyway, um, kind of took our turn there and cleaning the floors and cleaning out the drainage gutters and eventually working our way. But we do fuel oil changes and that sort of thing. Gave me my love for cars. Uh, so it was good. It was good, strong work ethic. That's, I still have that. I'll be 77 uh, next month, uh, and I'm
Still kicking.
still kicking. I'm still have a full-time practice in trauma work in the EMDR up there in Fairbanks, and actually I'm looking to maybe engage in it a little bit down here in Soldotna
Be awesome.
because I
Be
can
huge
do
for the
it
community.
by telemed. So anyway,
Well, that's cool. We'll get into the counseling thing because I think
mhm.
that's super interesting. Um, you know, growing up in Fairbanks at that time, there's probably what? Is there 15,000 people at that time?
No,
Dang.
there'd be well under 10,000 by then. Yeah.
And then so you just saw it kind of like grow and grow. And at what point um, did you start to? Because we've chatted about this before, where kind of like anxiety, some depression stuff. Where do you remember that kind of first being
Mm.
something you noticed?
Actually, um, early childhood. Um, there's an event that I ultimately found out about in a counseling session when I was 54 and discovered where that avoidance
Right.
thing came. And you've grown up with that.
The lucky beneficiary.
Yes. Well, and in a sense, you have said to me once, um, Dad, when growing up, I noticed that you just kind of stepped back from things. It's a reflexive reaction. And so, Dad, I just decided I just kind of do the other way, and I'd step toward things, and I much admire that. So,
Look how like intuitive I was at such a young age. Man,
yes, you
what
were.
a real
Yes, you were.
professional. It's paid off really well. Um, no, that's interesting because it's so opposite my personality. The like avoid things
Mm.
or choose not to be involved or um and I think that's a good aspect in some ways of like let me give myself some time to think about something. I tend to jump all in without thinking about it, and then you know what lessons after.
Not always, but you're closer to that to
Sure,
stepping forward than you are to stepping
sure.
away.
Um, now growing up, you know, the only reason I know this is from pictures and from you telling us that you know you did some real estate stuff, but then ultimately ended up at the university doing
Mhm.
your career number one. The switch from because what was that 2003 ish when you started doing your master's?
That's about the time I finished it.
Okay, okay. So what was it that made? I mean, for me on the outside, that switch from being in a management position, having spent a full career at the university, I guess I wasn't in tune with how much, like, if you were doing counseling. I remember you doing, being on medication and those kinds of things for the anxiety and depression. Um, More when I was in high school, I remember that.
Mhm.
Were you doing counseling at all during that time?
You graduated in 2004,
Hmm.
so I was just completing the program and just transitioning because it was in 2004. Um, I'd spent almost 20 years at the university, a very different circumstance. I had struggled, managed to get a degree in business as a young man when I got back from the service. And the opportunities were in procurement and contracting. And I, after about 10 years, wound up at the university and director of contracting and business services. Terrific job, terrific staff that we built kind of together. Um, but there was a moment, I was about 50 at the time. If there was a moment, I'd always kind of wanted to be a counselor, but uh, didn't know if that was practical or even attainable. And so I decided, well, I'll get something practical like a business degree, which turned out very well. Um, but one day, I was down in the personnel office, and a fellow, Dr. Jerry Mohat, he's since passed, but good, nice man, good man. And he was the dean of the counseling program. And we were very different places, but in the system. Kind of enjoyed one another though when we were, chatting around after meetings and that sort of thing. And so I walked into personnel, and here's Jerry standing there, great big tall guy. Um, and we got to chatting a little bit, and he got to telling me about this counseling program that he was putting together to try and get more people out into the bush. For those of you who don't know, that's what we call in Australia, I guess they call it the outback.
Hmm.
Up here, it's out in the bush. Um, and he wanted to get more counseling out there because the need is extraordinary. And he was excited about it. He was about my age now that I am now back then. And so he's telling me, and I started to interrupt him and tell him, I always wanted to be a counselor. And I think, nah, this is his story. I'm going to leave it to him. And I listened a while longer, and I just had to tell him. I said, Jerry, I said, this is terrific. I said, I always wanted to be a counselor. And he said, well, why don't you? And I thought, oh, I had a good answer for him.
Yeah.
Completely uninformed,
Yeah.
but a good answer. Anyway, in 3 minutes, he laid out, Terry, you can be a counselor. You got a 4-year degree. You got a lot of life experience. You're what the system is looking for. The graduate program is classes. The graduate level classes start in 2 weeks.
No time like the
You
present.
can sign up for them. You don't even have to join the program. You sign up with the permission of the instructor. And if one of the instructors has a question, feel free to tell them that they can call me for a reference. Boom. I left that moment right there. And I don't think my feet touched the floor when I was walking down the hall back to him. And I'm in my full business suit and all like that. I knew that I was going to be a counselor.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And at 50.
54.
54.
That's when I graduated.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you graduated high school the same year that I
Yeah.
graduated. I retired from the university on a Friday, walked across the stage on Sunday, and Monday morning went to work with a counseling agent here in town that I had interned in, and boom, there it was.
Boom. What was the draw towards counseling? Like, what was it that you liked or felt like? Because why didn't you pursue that at the beginning?
Well, that's a different story. When I got back from the service, I started out working in the electrical union, which your younger brother and son Robin is in, very successful at it. It just really wasn't quite for me. Um, I did wind up getting drafted. It was back during the Vietnam era. I'm not a combat veteran. I am a veteran, but not of combat. Um, and where was it going with that?
We'll just think,
Oh, I know. I came back from the service. I did really well in it. It was good for me. And I was talking to my dad, and I said, you know, Dad, I think I'm going to go back to school. And he said, well, son, what do you want to do? And I said, you know, I'd really like to be a counselor. And Dad grew up in the Great Depression, you know, went through World War II, ate beans a lot in his life. And he said, in his sincerest advice was, son, by God, I don't think a man can make a living as a counselor. I thought, oh, well, that's kind of,
oh,
I thought, okay, I'll go get a degree in business.
yeah, sure.
It all works together.
Yeah, it all came together. Well, and so now, not only did you choose counseling, but you chose, in my opinion, some of the most intense kind of
Yeah,
counseling
which
with trauma.
I never would have done if I'd have.
Sure.
I planned to go into marriage and family counseling, but I'm terrible at it. I learned that
Well,
quickly.
you can't be that bad. I mean, you've been married for almost 50 years, so
It'll be 50 years with your mother Nancy in this October 25th of this year.
so awesome.
Wonderful. The the so with the counseling, yes, the lane that I'm in is trauma. Kind of chose me because I was still carrying with me this avoidant man that was just been there my whole life, kind of anxious and you know, all the time, and didn't know what it was. But I met a lady there. I'll tell her name. She's helped me a great deal. A lady by the name of Rachel Casher. She's a fellow counselor there in Fairbanks. I admire her greatly. And she introduced me to the concept of EMDR.
What does EMDR stand for?
EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. It's a process, and we can maybe get into that a little later. It's not just, of course, we talk, but it's not what people understand and experience so often in just talk, talk, talk. I did that for years, and nothing got better. So this is the way the brain operates. They know now from the capability they have to see the brain actually operating. It's a process to literally take targets that we identify, desensitize them because they're kind of stuck in that trauma moment.
And when you say desensitize, you don't mean like chemically desensitize.
Oh,
you
no,
mean,
no, no. You desensitize it by approaching it gently with structure, where the client is completely in control. They can stop and start anytime they want. It's not hypnosis. I do not do any kind of altered state work. Let me tell you the kind of weird thing too, how I discovered the effectiveness of EMDR. I was taking my first weekend of training, not certification. I've been certified now for every 2 years, excuse me, since 2007. But just the basic training, I was down in Vancouver and we got a class of people, and they're going to teach us the basics of how to use eye movement, literally. And I'm sitting in class, and you know, at those conferences and whatnot, so often they say, okay, now we're going to break up, and people pair off, and one's going to be the counselor and the other's going to be the patient, the client, and then switch. So I'm sitting there with this young lady that's easily half my age. So I said, okay, I'll be the client. I'm not working on it. I got nothing here that I'm working on, except I'd always had this little picture over here, kind of an impression. Every now and again, I'd get this view, and I never knew where it came from. Well, that's funny because I had no reaction to it at all. But I thought, well, I'll just use that. Now, this is not typical, so I don't want to scare anybody. EMDR is as gentle as you want it to be. But it taught me a good lesson too at the same time. This young lady, she said, "You ready?" I said, "Yes, I am." "Are you focused on the target?" "Yes, I am." And she started, and you just literally, you move your eyes back and forth. They used to think it was the dreamer, like in a dream, looking back and forth through the landscape. It's not. It's a switching mechanism. I don't go too far into the weeds here, but yes, I'm paying attention. She started this movement, very classic movement. And I did about 4 reps, and my anxiety came out of my feet and went right through my hair. And I knew enough to know that, holy crap, this is something's. So I raised my hand, and Dr. Marshall Walensky came over and said, "What's going on?" And I explained it to him. I said, "I have no idea what it is." He said, "Well, we're not go ahead and shut it down here." And he said, "When you get back to Fairbanks, connect with somebody if you can. It's EMDR certified and then does trauma work." And that's Rachel Casher.
Got it.
She brought that back to me, and we did the work. And I discovered something at 54 that had happened to me when I was 18 months old that I had no memory of.
That's crazy.
No, we don't use that
Oh,
word.
that's sorry, the big C word. Sorry. Cancer, crazy. Yeah, got it.
And so we were able to root that out. I actually discovered a second one. I won't go into the details on it, but they were quite traumatic. And when our mind is amazing, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's effective, and it's always trying to protect you. So in doing this and having that reaction and then finding that relief, I knew it. That's my lane right there. And I've been doing it now for 20 and going on 21 years.
It's awesome. It's been interesting, over the years, listening to your stories of like how you work with the brain. And it's been difficult for me to understand because, we think of like trauma or something that's happened to us, that, I'm just gonna like work through it. I'll go to a counselor, I'll tell them about it. They'll tell me to feel better. They might give me some exercises or something. And then
sorry.
Yeah, you're a counseling elitist. It's fine.
Yes.
Yeah. But one of the things that had it kind of make sense to me was when you were describing trauma as like, say, like a pea-sized thing in your brain, that is stuck there, and using the left and the right side of your brain, you're able to kind of like weave the connection to kind of like massage out that pea size, like almost like knot, kind of. Is that accurate? Am I telling people crazy stuff?
Well,
Not
there's
crazy stuff, inaccurate
obviously
information.
a little more to it. The way I explain it to people is everything we experience, this interview, a sip of water, everything that we goes 4 places in our brain. It comes in, just like you're looking at something, it comes in through the prefrontal cortex. It moves up higher and this is where we pay attention, what's coming in. Goes up a little higher. That's where the brain decides, well, what do we think about this experience here? Now that can be wow, or it could be ordinary and meaningless. It then goes to a little thing about this big. It's about the size and shape of an almond, back here in the center of our brain, called the amygdala. And now this is a very simplified version of this, but it's not terribly complex. The amygdala says, oh, I'm receiving this information and these thoughts about this, and it attaches that experience to the nervous system, which goes everywhere in our bodies except our nails and our hair. Other than that, we got nerve endings. That stores all those feelings in, and moves it second to the last place, or next to the last place, to the hippocampus, and it sits there. And that's by design. It sits there so that later at night, when we go into dream sleep, whether we know we're dreaming or not, but we go into a rapid eye movement where the eyes are going back and forth. And that's the mechanism that moves this issue that's sitting in the hippocampus, whether it's like I said, that sip of water, and makes to that final destination out here, long-term memory. It's over, it's time-oriented, I'm not in danger, and now I'm starting to gather some of the insights and the strengths then by knowing how I made it through those things, and they make sense. Uh, so that's true, as I said, for a very ordinary thing. And it's true for something because the mind has an amazing ability. Our right brain over here, this is where our emotions and all that are. Our right brain, when something is so overwhelming that the system is got bupkis, we don't know what to do with it. The right brain, that's not a technical term, but the right brain can reach over, grab that memory, and slam it into a vault over here in the right side, and you don't know it's there. It blanks it completely out from your awareness for safekeeping until the brain can figure out what to do with this. Well, for me, it was when I was 54 years of age. But when we got to it, worked it gently, consistently, and it started moving. We do a lot of measuring. What's your level of disturbance when you go back to that? There's negative cognitions and positive cognitions. The negatives aren't true, feel true. The positives are true, don't feel true. And then we connect that. Were you feeling that in your body? What are the emotions? So we're retying all of the systems together here that went through that original experience, whether for the client. And then we keep measuring. Scale of 0 to 10 for disturbance. That will start, even if it was way up here at a 10, that will start declining over the course of a session or several sessions. And it will start moving down towards 0, where that same thing, just I'm looking right at it, it doesn't bother me.
That's cool.
Yeah. The other side of that is to bring those positive cognitions, which in fact are already intrinsically true about each one of us, each one of you, but they don't feel true, but they will. Going back to that target, they may start down here at 0. Man, they just feel completely false that I'm capable, that I'm worthwhile, that I'm strong, that I'm lovable, whatever it is, that I'm safe. That's a big one. But that will start becoming your experience of that same target there will increasingly be, that's becoming more true, more validating. So you get what we call a 0, when we're done with the target, it's called a 0-7 clear, 0 disturbance. A full 7, that's the highest level of yes, it feels completely true. And the final thing, what's your body doing now? It's clear. That's a target that's no longer in the hippocampus. It's out here in long-term memory, and it's done. It's healed.
I can only imagine what that must feel like for somebody that's, you've shared just, obviously no patient information, but just details of people that have, gone through some horrible trauma as a kid, develop, multiple personality disorder or serious, inner turmoil for decades. And to get to a point where they aren't reacting to that thing that had so controlled their life for so long, I can only imagine the relief that they get has got to be immense.
It is, and what they're able to begin to realize with it that is continuingly affirming of that is that it's done. And so they're living all of the weight that they've carried of that is off their shoulders, as it were. And then if they've got other stuff, they'll move on to that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's an EMDR target from start to finish.
That's cool. It's such a neat therapy. And I mean, I had no idea that it even existed until you started getting into it.
It wasn't developed until about around about the time you were born. And then science and breakthroughs in PET scans and CAT scans where you can actually watch the brain root. I don't have that capability. But has just proven it. Absolutely. Yes, that's what's going on. They can
So
see
in
it.
those scans, can they actually pinpoint, like visibly see this is where the trauma is at, or is it they know that it's in that part of the brain because of how it's impacting the client, or how do they?
Well, clearly I'm not a doctor. What they can measure is the affect in your body. What are your emotions like? And they're going down. They're calming. They're calming. The positivity of those true statements, and now they're finally starting to feel true. Some things get pretty embedded, and this, as we've already said, this kind of this avoidant. I want to always kind of step back as my initial response. I'm getting better at that. Uh, That's part of why I'm here today, is because one of those things I say, just lean toward it, Terry.
Yeah. And you're doing a fantastic job, by the way. So
Well, I appreciate that.
this is going to skyrocket to the top of the charts. So,
All right.
yeah. One of the things I think I also find really interesting is its impact on nightmares.
Yes.
I'd love for you to share a little bit about your success rate, which I think is incredible. Why it works the way that it does, and maybe a little bit of intel into why we have nightmares and how the brain processes it.
Well, good. That's good. Yeah, I appreciate that. A nightmare is a dream that's stuck. The job of the hippocampus here, remember that next to the last place that it's supposed to get to, is still holding on to it in an exquisitely complete and nuanced experience. And again, it doesn't know quite what to do with it. So the as the system is, you're watching this, the system is actually even doing the EMDR and tracking it. They can see it in the brain and how it's working. It's actually doing, you're just seeing the electrical activity in the brain increasing and decreasing and so forth. So that's the evidence that yes, it's moving. But repeat your question, because I'm not sure I had it.
Just as far as like nightmares, like why do they happen? I think a lot of people jump in and like, oh, I had this nightmare, it must mean something, and they try to dissect it, and they get. Does it have any? Is there any value in trying to find the meaning of a nightmare when it comes to EMDR, or does it not matter?
I don't discount that, but that's not the solution. If I may, if we could, is understand it in terms of the fact that the solution to nightmares is to not have nightmares anymore. And I don't mean by taking meds and that kind of thing. I can demonstrate in 5 minutes how to resolve nightmares.
Do you want to do that?
I'm happy to do it.
Absolutely.
I do this with my clients all the time. I don't take my shirt off. I don't mean that. But I want access to this area right here. A nightmare is a dream in the hippocampus, and the hippocampus's job is to move it out of that part of the brain around to where it's done. It's over. It's trying to do a job. What happens when we go into a nightmare is that even though we're asleep, the nightmare, of course, is disturbing, and that's happening over here in the right brain. And even though asleep, our system wants to push against that and defend against that. And so the dream's trying to do its job. The nightmare is trying to do its job, move it out. I've worked with people that wake up screaming and drenched in sweat. And it goes on for years and years. And I used to have a very long, drawn out protocol of EMDR targeting and that sort of thing. And it worked, but it took several sessions. Somehow over the years, my clients taught me, we developed a very short process. And the key to it is recognize the nightmare. It's not the enemy. It's trying to do its job. It's dedicated to doing that. And when it can't, when we start pushing back on it, and it's trying to get it out and over and done, what happens, I believe anyway, is that the intensity of our dream actually increases because it's pushing this way, the dream mechanism. And we're asleep, but still our conscious mind is saying, no, 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 we don't want to do that. It increases the stress. REM sleep is down about 7 layers, I believe. There's lots of stuff in here people want to argue about. I'm perfectly happy to concede to people no more than I do. But I do this over and over and over again. I've done it for 20 years. I have not seen it fail.
That's awesome.
It is.
Pretty good record.
So the solution is to align yourself with that mechanism. I do not ask for content. It's in a sense, it's irrelevant.
Sure.
So I don't ask for content.
So as you go through this, so I don't know how many people actually watch this versus just listen to it. So as you're doing each step, if you could kind of explain what you're doing, where your hand is, and then kind of walk somebody that couldn't see.
Here's what you can do. And if you're watching or listening, I want you to just open your shirt just a little bit. And I don't know why it's this area, but that's where it is. Right here at the bottom of your throat and the top of your chest. Just take one hand, it doesn't matter which. And I want you to just kind of connect with that mechanism that's trying to do a job. And for some reason, this is where people most often feel it. Sometimes they'll notice, well, I got a little tension in my stomach. I say, all right, take the other hand and just put it right there. So we're connecting, just being mindful of this capability over here. It's trying to do a job. And we want to be a partner in that. So what I do is ask the client to repeat after me. And I ask them to say to that dream mechanism, not the dream itself. That's content. I'm talking about the mechanism. To say to that dream mechanism and say it out loud, thank you. I know you have a job to do. I know you are part of the healing. And I appreciate that. And you have my permission to finish. I'll let them just sit with that for a bit. And then I'll ask them to do it a second time out loud. Thank you. I know you have a job to do. This part of ourselves. I know you are part of the healing. And I appreciate that. And you have my permission to finish. That's it. I'll ask them just sit with that for a moment and ask them how they're feeling. Usually, almost without exception, oh, I don't know, I feel better. I feel calmer. Yeah, because it's an alliance now, not oh my God, a white knuckle.
Yeah.
And I said I've been doing that for many, many years now. And it's the first time I ever broadcasted.
Well, now we got to monetize it. So we need to just go ahead and put some money to this thing. We need to just copyright that system.
Well, I'll seek his advice on that.
Yeah.
Yes. No, it works. It works. And it makes sense that it works. Intuitively, it kind of makes sense.
Well, it is incredible in having, listened to you talk about this for over 20 years.
Yeah.
The part that I struggle with the most to conceptualize is the part that, whether it's trauma, a nightmare. I mean, you've talked about, instances where the nightmare isn't something scary. It's just repetitive, and the person is
same thing.
is like, I have the same stupid dream every single night. It's driving me crazy.
Hmm.
So it doesn't have to be something traumatic. It can be something very, very simple.
One exception. If it's still stuck in the hippocampus, that means it's trauma.
Got it.
That's anything that moves into the hippocampus, spends a couple of days there and moves on out into long-term memory. It's not trauma anymore once it leaves. If it's still there, great big capital T or just tiny small font T. If it's still sitting in the hippocampus,
So it's
qualifies.
nightmares that you've had for an extended period of time, not
Oh,
just like
I've
one you've had a couple of times. And
no, but if if you get it back, there's
yeah,
no reason not to go ahead and form that alliance with it.
sure. Well,
Uh,
just it's so interesting that you've shared that you speak to the trauma, and I think it's such an interesting.
well, I speak to that part of the self, the system
Right.
that's holding that.
Well, even just like the whole EMDR process, like speaking to the
Yeah.
trauma, that moment, and acknowledging that part, and that these clients can feel that communication between that part and their awareness, their subconscious. I'd love for you to share the story if you can, um, about the situation where the part told you how old they are.
Oh, yeah.
'Cause that to me is it's like
Now
witchcraft.
this seems spooky, but again, I don't do any weird stuff. I really don't. I do stuff that most people aren't familiar with, but this getting in touch with that part, not even just in that specific memory, you can map this. It's this is really old psychology, been around since 1906. Well, psychiatry didn't start much earlier than that. It was in the late 1800s. But a guy named Fraser, Dr. Fraser, was working with people in trauma, and he'd notice these reactions and these defenses that would come up, like this, what I still deal with, so to not as much, but this avoidance or panic attacks, or uh, some of this also applies in addictions to the urges to drink. Um, the right brain forms defenses against the trauma. We only have four choices when something is threatening us. Rule number one is move away from the danger, move away from the danger. But we can't, especially when we're little or otherwise in a situation where we're mentally, emotionally, physically confined. Choice number two, turn around and fight the danger. That's how you get it. You run it off. But you can't because you're a little kid or whatever, but you can't. So now we have to go to number three. Number three is block it out. Just block it out. And you'll see little kids will do this instinctively sometimes when they don't want to hear that it's time to go to bed or something like that. But it really is. And you're going to have a little kid will stand there sometimes. They'll plug their ears and they'll close their eyes. They're essentially turning down or diminishing two of their five senses right there. So they do this. Na, 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 na.
I've seen that.
Yes, you have.
Up close and personally.
So have I.
Yeah.
So the third is to try and block it up, but you can't sustain that. And you're not really online with it. So the final solution, you only get four, submit to the danger. Now that sounds like the worst possible thing. But it's all that's left on this issue of submit. That's what they tell us to do if grizzly bears are chasing us. They said, don't run. He can do 40 miles an hour. You can't. So if that attack is, this isn't, we can wait a little bit, find out if it's a false charge or not. I've never had to do that. Thank God.
Thank God. Okay. Just ignore all of your senses. Like, no, just lay down on the ground, pretend you're dead.
So if you, again, you can't fight the bear. So and if you just try and block it out, that's not going to really have an effect on the bear. So the final thing that they tell you to the bear is submit to it. You drop down, tell you to put your hands across your back of your neck because he wants to take a bite from you, or just to see what you, yeah. And you demonstrate that you're not a threat. You're not opposing, you're not in opposition, you're no danger to the bear. Well, we do that with people and in relationships sometimes too, when we're in a very rundown position, either as a kid or in two couples that have this very imbalanced relationship. One very dominating, one very submissive. The submissive one called the enabler. That's all you got. The enabler, but in a situation, this can sound weird, but in a situation where you've got a very dominant personality, is yelling and screaming or weeping pathetically or whatever, and the other person is just shutting down, trying not to cause any trouble, trying to go along and so forth. Of those two parties, which one is controlling the other?
The only reason I know the answer to this is because we've talked about this
Mhm.
before, but it's the enabler. It's the one
Yes.
that the weaker
Yeah,
one that is
it actually is, because what the enabler is doing is endorsing what the aggressor is doing by shutting down. Now, again, that's because we're down to number 4 here. Um, but knowing that gives you a path forward, and that is to learn counseling, that kind of thing, how to kind of shut down that enabling response, get a little distance. You don't have to yell and scream. They're better at it than you are. Um, and but you're just making yourself not available for that anymore. I'm sorry, but if you're going to yell and scream at me, I'm going to go for a walk. Or we can talk about this. I'm happy to, but I'm not here to be yelled at, screamed at, have stuff thrown at me. That I've not experienced that with your mother.
because she would beat you.
Yes, you would. Well, I clearly would submit to that.
Yes,
I guess she's terrific.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys, I don't want to get too far off into the weeds here.
No,
But
no, but
this nightmare exercise,
yeah, that's so cool.
yeah,
Well, I did want to hear just real quickly, and we'll let people get going here, but is the instance where you're able to talk to the trauma or that
yeah,
part and actually get a numerical, like how you described it like those parts get stuck in time. So something
mhm,
that happens when you're a kid and now you're an adult, it doesn't have any concept of time. And so you've kind of described it as, a childhood trauma. That trauma still thinks that it's like 4. So
mhm,
can you just walk real quick
yeah.
through kind of that scenario and how you address that portion of kind of realigning that part with reality?
Good. You can develop this thing I started to talk about a moment ago, sorry, called a Fraser's table. This guy Fraser developed this. He began to notice, there's connection, there's communication, there's effort going on here. Doesn't make any sense logically, but he's noticing it. And so he came up with this notion, and I use this all the time. So I want you to imagine that you've got a conference room here. It's not a Starbucks or anything like that. It's just purely, basic. We've got a table here. And I'll ask the person, I want you to just notice, be open. We want to ask the right side of your brain here. Just be mindful of that. And to my client, I say, I want you to simply notice, what's the shape of the table? What? Yeah, what's the shape of the table? For some, it's an oval, others, it's a circle, some, it's a rectangle, others, it's a square. But that's part of the right brain starting to connect over here to the left brain. It's a table. Okay. So I ask the client. So as you're looking at that table, and I'll draw it out, um, thinking like a clock, where's your spot on this table? Well, I don't know why, but I mean, I'm there at 6 or I'm there at 4 or 5, whatever it is, 11, 1, anything. Okay. And then I'll ask the client, so I want you to continue, and I'm talking to the right brain as well. To the right brain, thank you. We appreciate you. Uh, doing a great job. I ask the client, I want you to simply notice where you see other chairs around that table. You'll get 4, 5, 6. Sometimes people say, oh, there's like one at every. Nope. They're trying to do it with their left brain when they do that. No, simply notice. It takes a while, but you get used to it, and it works very well. And and then we begin to, okay, so you're getting this reaction, one that's particularly bothersome to them, or I I won't go too down this trail because it seems a little weird, but it's very effective. I'll ask my client, would you go inside and ask this part of your brain, the system, if I might have permission to speak to that part? Just wait. And they'll get a yes, it's okay. Um, so that, and then as that proceeds, we begin to identify those parts, right? And every part has the same things in common. The first thing, every part is protective. It may seem like the weirdest, wrong way to do it, but it is always, this part is formed with beneficence. It's to protect you, it's to help you. So, don't get hung up there. Well, why is that? I don't want that.
So the
Uh,
each one of the seats, like when you ask the person, like how many seats are at this, table that you've drawn
and
out,
I'll name them by clock
in
positions.
those, when they, if they choose like 4 seats or they choose 10 seats,
10 would be a little excessive, I think.
are those the parts
Yes.
that you're looking to build out?
Those
Got
are
it.
the parts over here in the right brain. The right brain is amazing. And we identify those parts because each part has a particular protective mode, even if it seems the worst thing. It's not, it's part of a system. And they work together. Some work in a little opposition. All of them are a little out of time phase, but that's your internal defensive system. It doesn't sleep. It's up on the wheel all the time. Um, but that's where then you can start to introduce these parts to the issues that the client is dealing with. And oftentimes, I mean, things like migraines, people get migraines sometimes, not all of them, but oftentimes migraines is a result of one of these parts. Um, Anxiety attacks or anger, or they self-identify. I don't label them in advance. Some methodologies say, no, you have this kind of this and this and this. I let the part tell the client what they do. So that's a very quick overview.
No,
But
that's really
and
cool.
then with that, then that becomes part of your dialogue. Okay, we're working on this. What's going on? Any part in the system here that's got a question or a comment, I
Mhm.
always ask. And I'm always pleased at how often you get a question come back from the right brain
Mhm.
because the client's learning to listen to it now.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so much
it's
to that, and
fascinating.
I can see why you've been doing it for as long as you have,
Yeah,
because it's always
I, I, can't-
always
I
changing.
don't know how I'm ever going to figure out how to retire here because it's, I'm 77 now.
Well,
Uh,
you don't want to add to the irony would be adding to the trauma of like having a massive heart attack or a stroke in the chair with a client who had a loved one die of a heart attack or stroke.
that would be tough on the client,
That
but I'd still have to charge them.
you would absolutely, yes.
I am a businessman
That's right.
after
That's right.
all. Yeah.
Well,
So out there, good luck with this stuff, guys. If it's of any help, if you want to post my email and that sort of thing, I'd
yeah,
be more than
absolutely. What I'll
happy.
do is I'll put your email in the show notes.
Mhm.
New Life Counseling located in Fairbanks, Alaska,
Yep.
but you are doing some telemed stuff. And if somebody is going through something, this is always the avenue that I tend to lean on is like,
Mhm.
have you heard of EMDR? And I tend to give your information out. And I just think that ultimately at the end of this is there are avenues to get help, whatever that help looks like. And I think that's, ultimately my goal with this whole program is for people to stop for a second, think about, is my behavior or is life the way that it is because of something that I'm doing? And 9 times in 10 it is, right? Life isn't happening to you. You're an active participant in that. And I think too often we give ourselves too much like credit for being a victim, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
and that victim mentality keeps us stuck. right? And you're not able to move forward. So
Every addiction tells us one thing. It says you're special.
right,
There's a special reason why it's okay for you to drink. There's a special reason it's okay to do drugs or whatever it is, or to, you know. But that's the trap.
right.
The good news is no, you're not special,
It's
which
more
means
different.
you're capable.
Yeah.
You just need to develop those capabilities.
Yep. Absolutely. I had the realization here the other day at a meeting that, um, there's 12 steps, right? And in each one of those steps, there's a different task or um, skill that you're learning, and at the core of it, yes, the not drinking and not doing drugs and those kinds of things are in essence a requirement, because that's the thing that's kind of getting in the way of you being able to actually address, behavior,
Mm,
attitude, confidence
yeah.
issues,
Quality of life.
quality of life, those kinds of things. And so, you remove this one part, kind of like with the EMDR, you remove this one part and allows you to be able to move forward in life as an active participant. Um, and so I hope that this was helpful for some people. I hope that this was interesting. I always love hearing you talk about this stuff. I'm so proud of you,
Oh,
not only for coming on this thing. This is really cool, and knowing the challenges that you have. Um, but just I can't thank you enough for doing this, for all your support over the
you're
years.
welcome.
I love you very
I
much,
love you too.
and I'm proud of you for doing a second 20+ year career. That's incredible. So happy early birthday. Um,
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this. Again, this is the Addictions Podcast. I'm Paul Kelly. This is my dad, Terry Kelly. And you can check us out on Spotify or on Instagram at the Addictions Podcast. And have a great day. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.